and welcome to today's video, and yet another cold, wet and windy day here in the UK. For those of you who watched my last video, thank you very much for taking the time to comment, subscribe and like. I really do appreciate it. For those of you who watched that video, you'll also know that in this video I plan to talk about the interior of the car, and considering it's so cold here in the UK, I'm going to take advantage of that and use it as an opportunity to talk about the inside of the car instead. I am going to talk through the interior overall, things I like, things I dislike, some of the changes they've made to the facelift interior. I'm also going to talk about the virtual cockpit, as well as some other changes they've made to the MMI as well. I will also show the stats of the car. So I think it's about 1,300 miles now, so my average miles per gallon, etc. As you can see, there is plenty of condensation coming out the back of the car, so I'm really not lying when I say it's cold here. So let's jump inside, let's get warm and talk about the interior. Okay, so here we are looking at the virtual cockpit. I do apologise that some of the steering wheel is blocking off some of the screen. I don't have a mount that's long enough. And I don't really want to hold the camera either, because then the footage will be really shaky. With all that said, this is the MMI. Now at the moment I have the car set to individual, which you can see just here, and I also have it as the kind of sportier view, which is the big rev dial that you see in the center. To the right of that we have the power and torque, and to the left I just have date and time at the moment. But scrolling through those options you can see different stats about the car. So starting with those, on the steering wheel you have a button that you can scroll with. So the next screen down shows the current consumption. At the moment I'm using 15.3 miles per gallon. Below that we have the car's short-term memory. So as you can see, 15.3 miles per gallon based on half an hour of driving. I believe that's the average speed, 11 miles per hour. Don't quote me on that, but the only reason I'm questioning myself is because that seems a bit too slow. Not to say that I've been driving around at 100 miles an hour everywhere, but I certainly haven't been driving around at 11 miles per hour either. I've also covered 5.3 miles in this journey. Below that we have the car's long-term memory, and this will be more interesting for those of you who are thinking about buying one of these cars. Now, as you can see, I have done just under 1,400 miles. So we've done 1,392 miles in total, around 78 hours worth of driving, I believe, or I think that's the time the car has been running. It makes no real difference. But to the left of that we got the most important stat, which is the overall miles per gallon. So 23.7 is my overall miles per gallon. Now that I would say is based on very mixed driving. For the most part I'm driving around in either comfort or individual. I'll talk to you about how I've got individual set up in a moment, but I would say a majority of my driving is taking it quite easy. That gives you an indication of what the kind of real life miles per gallon could be. I would expect that if you're going to drive this car hard, most of the time it's going to be lower than that. Now below that again we've got what I believe is the average speed, but like I said, don't quote me on that because I'm a bit unsure. Now what we're able to do is, there's nothing below this, but what we can do is we can change what we're looking at. So here we've got two options: reset values. So if you want to just take everything back to 0, you can. Of course you can't do that with the mile counter, seems obvious, but just in case. But one option we have is additional display. Now if I choose this option, we then have many different things we can choose to have on the right side permanently. So where power and torque currently are, I can change that to something else. So for example, I could change it to the date and time. I could also change it to the consumption display, short or long-term memory, but then this additional option we have, which is the G meter. This is probably not going to tell you much when you're driving on the road. It looks pretty cool, but it's more for, I would say, the track. That's where you're going to get more use out of this view. Now, in addition to changing what we're looking at currently, we can also change the entire view. Now, for those of you who have done any kind of research on the virtual cockpit, you're probably very familiar with all of these options, but I just thought I would show you exactly what I have. So if I click view on the steering wheel, what you'll notice is the speedometer shrinks, and that goes to the right hand side, and then you have your rev counter on the left hand side. We then have the car's memory here. So as you can see, we've got the oil temperature, the amount of boost which is being used, and then the long term. And again, you can scroll up and down through those, which are the same options we looked at just a second ago. But what I'm able to do is then filter my way through different options. So here we're looking at the music. If I go one more, we can then see phone. And then if I go one more, we then have the sat nav up on this screen. Now, in my experience of using the sat nav on a few journeys, what I would say is it's quite hard, or at least I found it hard, adjusting to looking down at your sat nav. This car doesn't have a heads-up display or anything like that, so you are looking down at your sat nav. So I actually stick with the older screen that's in the pre-facelifts and have my sat-nav on there instead, just because I personally find it easier to look at. However, this, of course, is very, very cool. We can do all of the same options that we could in the previous sat-nav. So, for example, we can zoom in and out using the wheel. We can also enter our destinations as well. We can change how the map is shown. So we've got map colors here, automatic, day or night. We can change it from the standard map view to Google Earth. You can also have traffic updates fed to the sat nav as well, which is pretty cool. And then also map orientation. So we've got a 3D driving map at the moment, but if you'd prefer just like a 2D driving map, you can, or you also have the option for the north position map too. A few other options here as well. And then you have automatic, zoom. I always have it off just because it's really annoying sometimes when you're driving around a town, or if you're coming up to a busy junction, zooming in and out. I'm like, where am I going? Yeah, again, just a personal thing, but you can have it to intersection, off or on. To the left of that, we have the options for entering our destination. You can also add favorites. So for example, you can add your home address, your work address, etc. So pretty cool stuff. And that is the virtual cockpit. It's really cool. I would say that it's intuitive, but as I mentioned, the sat-nav is probably the only thing that I don't make full use of. Okay, so we've zoomed out a little bit now just to take a look at the steering wheel, which is how you control the virtual cockpit. So this here was the button I was using to scroll through the options in terms of short-term, long-term, etc., memory, and consumption, G meter, and so on. These buttons here are what you use to scroll through the different views. So as you can see, it's out of focus, but it's changing in the background. View changes it from this view back to the more sportier view. And then you've also got a back option too. So if I press back, for example, I've entered a destination in, I change my mind, I don't actually want to go there. I just press back and it will bring me back to this screen. Now, when you're using the sat-nav and these buttons in general, they also apply to what is shown to the left of the speedometer when you're looking at this view. So again, it's out of focus, but if I use these same buttons, you can see that it's changing as it should, which again is really cool, especially if you prefer this view but still want your sat-nav to the left. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you this screen here, which you can just see out of focus, that currently has the Apple CarPlay on it. And I'm going to explain why I think this bit of the sat-nav is pretty much useless when you have this screen just to the left and in a more comfortable view, in my opinion. Now, to the right, you've got the nav. So if you want to speak to the sat-nav, you can. If you want to tell it a destination, you can. You then have the standard Audi Star button, which can be configured to whatever you want that to be. So mine is currently set to my drive select. However, you can customize that. In the previous generation S3 that I have, the 2015, so pre-facelift, this button was a absolute lifesaver, because just to the right of this we have buttons for changing the song, which you didn't have in those older generation cars. So this was actually the button that you used to skip a song. Sounds really small, but it's a big deal. Okay. And then above that, you've got the option to answer phone or use Siri. So this button, when you have Apple CarPlay, is Siri. So you press it, you'll say something, and then Siri will do her thing in the background. I would expect that it does the same thing for the Android equivalent, but don't hold me to that because I don't have an Android phone. And that is the steering wheel. As you can see, Alcantara RS button, which is not too kind of in your face, just here. And then to the right of the steering wheel, if I just move my foot out of the way, what you can see is the options for your your light controls. As you can tell, I've never done an interior tour of a car before, so do bear with me. But we've got standard options here. So fog lights, front and back, and then you've also got your auto lights, headlights, dipped lights, and then also your timed headlights too. So I think they call them, I think it's something crazy like get home lights or something like that. So when you lock the car, they stay on for a few minutes or whatever. I don't know. Pretty standard Audi stuff. Now, the other thing, just to point out whilst we're here, is there is a new vent design. As you can see, small thing, but worth pointing out. These are much better looking than the pre-facelift vents, in my opinion. But yeah, not that big of a deal. Okay, so here we have the screen that you also get in the pre-facelift RS3/A3, and for the most part it's the same. The MMI has been updated, but a majority of the options are the same but in slightly different places. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I will just give you a tour of the options I have. So starting at the very top, we have car. In here I'm able to choose from the different drive select. So we have comfort, auto, dynamic, and then we have individual. And with individual, what we're able to do is specify exactly what we want, individual to be. So as you can see, I've got the engine and gearbox set to dynamic, the steering comfort, the quattro auto, and the engine sound dynamic as well. Now, I am holding the camera, so I do apologize if this footage is a little shaky, and also for some reason my lens is being a little temperamental today, so if it drops focus here and there, do bear with me. Now, in addition to the drive select options, we also have, as you saw, the options for the car overall. So here we've got vehicle settings, the driver assists, the AC controlling, and also the servicing and check intervals as well. You then have the handbook for the car in there too. Now, just heading back to the menu, we have sound. This just controls the sound, oddly enough, not the sound of the car. As you can see, there is a little speaker there, so it's pretty obvious to work out this is the sound of the stereo. Now, I got the comfort and sound pack, which means I have the Bang & Olufsen sound system, so you do have some options for what you're able to change, the treble, the bass, the sub, the balance, sound effects, and so on. Below that, you've got your radio options, your media, so if you're using Bluetooth, then your phone. You've got the telephone options. You then have navigation, which if I just click on and show you what that looks like, here is an alternative view of what we see on the virtual cockpit. And as I said, when I'm driving, I prefer to look at this screen because I find it a little easier to just glance at rather than looking down. Below the nav, we then have the Audi Connect options, Apple Carplay, which we'll come back to in a moment, and then the overall settings. And again, we've got options for language, date and time, the measurement units, the brightness, the connection manager, the reminder signal, usage tips, the speech dialogue system, so when you're talking to the car, for example, entering a new destination, how is it going to interpret that? And you can also restore back to the factory settings as well. Now in Apple CarPlay, it's Apple CarPlay. So for those of you who are familiar with how this works, I'll just give you an idea of how easy it is to use in these cars. Now, it's not going to be any different from any other car that's using Apple CarPlay, but the big difference is that this screen is not touchscreen. Okay, so in my Abarth, for example, it was a touchscreen, so it was a little easier to use, but actually you really adjust quite quickly just using the wheel. So here we've got music. I can jump out of that and I can go back to my playlists. I can also just go back again, excuse me, to the main menu where you've got your maps, which is sometimes, I would say, a little more reliable than the traffic alerts that you can have sent to the car. This probably gives you truer to life traffic updates, but don't hold me to that. Your messages, what you currently have playing, your Audi MMI app, and then your audiobooks, podcasts, phone options, etc. So standard Apple CarPlay stuff there.